And one last plug for the sign-in sheet. If you haven't signed in, make sure you do, because if you want more information or want to connect or find out, about stuff that you've missed, we can, get your contact information and reach out to you from there. And then I want to pass it over to Carissa to kind of just give a quick broad overview of the report that started all of this and brought all this together.
Yeah, thanks so much. Again, my name is Carissa Gilman Hernandez, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. A little over a year ago, I'll say a year and a half, to round that out. Action St. Louis, Sierra Club, Archie Defenders, and Dashtown South, who have already been doing a lot of work with racial justice in St. Louis City, partnered with the Environmental Law Center to at WashU to get a better sense of what was going on with environmental issues and racial and how they intersected with racial justice issues here in St. Louis City. The report found, or the research found, the report outlined 8 different areas or 8 different issues that were all kind of interconnected with each other that were disproportionately affecting the Black and Brown communities of St. Louis City. With that came out last fall. Then the plan was to put forward a game plan to introduce it to the world and to talk more about it and to really engage with community members. And then a pandemic hit, and so everyone's plans changed a little bit. And so we've assessed, and what we decided to do was this listening series where we really engage with community members about what was in that report and hear about solutions that we can build on together. I'm finished.
Great. Thanks so much, Carissa. So last week we talked about, it's called It's a Dump. We talked about illegal dumping and vacancies in communities and had really great presentations and really vibrant conversation. So we're really excited to continue that today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Vod to present on limited access to healthy food.
Thank you so much, Madison. Really appreciate it. Can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Excellent. Very critical question in the time of Zoom. Okay, perfect. And I will now get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Azad. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a second-year Master of Public Health student at the Brown School of Social Work and a student in the WashU Law Interdisciplinary Environmental Clinic. Over the past few weeks, we have explored several environmental justice issues disproportionately impacting Black St. Louisans. And this evening, we will be highlighting 2 more of these critical issues. The first being food apartheid and limited access to healthy food, and my colleague, Anna Catherine, will be highlighting the burden of high home energy costs. To begin, let's explore what food security is. Food security is defined as availability, access, and utilization of food. This means that individuals must have sufficient quantity of food available, physical and economic access to food, while also having enough dietary intake and ability to utilize nutrients in the food. So what happens if individuals lack these 3 main factors of food security? Many of you may be familiar with the term food desert, which is defined as a low-income neighborhood where either a substantial number or share of residents have low access to a supermarket or a large grocery store. But that term really does not capture the entire problem. When we use the term food desert, the issue is implied as just a geographic problem, but that is not the case. This is why we use the term food apartheid. Food apartheid highlights food systems as a whole, considering various factors like income, race, and geography. It focuses on social and racial inequalities that are at play in our food system. And it also recognizes that the systems that are in place are what make it difficult for people living in low-income areas to access fresh and healthy food. So now I want us to take a quick pause, and I want you all to think about what food access looks like for you and in your neighborhoods and in your community. Do you have enough food available? Do you have all forms of access to that food, whether that be physical or economic access? And is that food really serving your body? Circumstances leading to what we know as food apartheid in St. Louis vary, but things like historically discriminatory housing practices and redlining in St. Louis have impacted what food access looks like for Black St. Louisans. Black St. Louisans are almost twice as likely to have limited access to healthy food as white St. Louisans. So that gets us to think, what is that link? Why is this such a disproportionate burden in Black neighborhoods and in Black residents in St. Louis? In St. Louis City, there are fewer grocery stores with fresh food in majority Black neighborhoods. And secondly, there's limited personal and public transportation to reach distant stores with fresh food. Here we'll explore what food apartheid really looks like in St. Louis, and these two maps really paint a stark difference in what food access is in St. Louis. To begin, we can explore the map on the left, which shows low-income census tracts with low supermarket access. And the map on the right shows census tracts with low vehicle availability to access healthy food. You can also see both maps also highlight majority Black neighborhoods. You can see in those little black speckles that are highlighted in the map. From these maps, you can see the map on the left shows that there is a direct link between low-income neighborhoods and low supermarket access. This map also shows us that a significant share of the population in North City lives more than half a mile or a mile away from the nearest supermarket. We can also see in South City, where there are fewer majority Black census tracts, that these tracts that are majority Black tend to also be low income and have low supermarket access. The issue of access for many Black St. Louisans isn't just centered in what food options are in their neighborhoods, but also how to get to grocers that do have healthy foods. We can see on the map on the right that a majority of the city census tracts with low vehicle availability are also the same neighborhoods where residents live more than half a mile away from the nearest supermarket. And although public transportation can potentially increase mobility in residential areas with low vehicle availability, the St. Louis Metro Transit System prioritizes commercial areas over residential areas. For example, just think of, even though the Metro has opened the North County Transit Center, we know that services still haven't been expanded to North City. And thinking about both of these maps, you just think of how grocery shopping for healthy food really isn't a one-off monthly trip, but a more frequent trip, which requires to have access to a car or reliable transportation every day, far more than what is accessible to Black St. Louisans today. Now we can explore the impact of food and on your health. Research has shown access to healthy food is associated with lower risk for obesity and other diet-related chronic diseases. And for many Black St. Louisans, the health impacts of food apartheid are burdening the health and well-being of their daily lives. In St. Louis City, 38% of African American adults are obese compared to 27% of white city residents. And when it comes to diabetes, another adverse health outcome linked to food apartheid, 14% of African Americans have been diagnosed with diabetes compared with 11% of whites. The burden of costly treatment for many of these diseases can be prevented, and can be prevented by overhauling food systems in low-income and minority communities. Food justice in St. Louis as a movement has really been cultivated by community and driven by a history of Black activism. Small-scale food retailers, urban agriculture, and mobile markets are working to improve healthy food access for St. Louisans. Many different organizations are doing this really critical work, and for this evening's presentation, we've highlighted two of those groups. The first being the Heru Urban Farming Garden. The Heru Urban Farming Garden is a project that started in 2018 with 3 lots in the Kingsway West neighborhood in Ward 1, where 33% of the population lives below the poverty line. This pilot farm was so successful that the Heru Urban Farming acquired 4 more lots in the College Hill neighborhood in Ward 3, where 41% of the residents live below the poverty line. And we've also highlighted a quote here from Tasha Phonics, a food justice organizer at the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. She works with growers in North City, North County, and Metro East to access land, establish farms, and create value-added products from what they grow. And finally, without all of our other Environmental Justice Solution Series meetings, we've made it a point to highlight the impact of these environmental justice issues coupled with the pandemic. And with food apartheid, that's also a really critical space to address. The most recent CDC update on COVID-19 and people with certain medical conditions states adults living with obesity and diabetes, both of which are linked to food apartheid, might be at an increased risk for severe illnesses from the virus that causes COVID-19. And coupled with increased inactivity and minimal social support, COVID-19 has changed what normal food patterns have been for most of us, but that burden of food apartheid on Black St. Louisans has been exacerbated by the pandemic. COVID-19 has worsened food insecurity for many school children whose families relied heavily on school food programs in order for their children to receive healthy food. Additionally, people working blue-collar jobs have been impacted the most by the pandemic, burdening families who already have minimal access to healthy and affordable food to spend more in order to eat nutritious food. All of these factors continue to reinforce the cycle of poverty, forcing those who can least afford it to always pay the most. We also see the cycle reinforced in the high costs of energy bills, which my colleague Anna Catherine will cover here shortly. To conclude, I really want us to think back to that first question and reflect on what food access looks like to you. Are there social inequalities that you can automatically think of when you think about food access? Are there ways that you can think of to erase some of these injustices? The goal of this series is beyond exploring maps and statistics, but rather listening to you and learning from your recommendations and insights. I will now turn it over to Anna Catherine for her presentation. Thank you very much. I'm finished.
Thanks, Ogbad. I am just going to share my screen. Let's see. Sorry. Is that correct? So we got it? Okay, great. So, okay, good evening, everyone. As Ogbad said, my name is Anna Catherine, and I usually go by AK. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a law student with the Interdisciplinary Environmental Clinic at WashU Law. And I'm here tonight to talk about home energy costs and their disparate impact on Black St. Louisans. So in this series, we've discussed many issues like air pollution, asthma, vacancy, and illegal dumping. And high home energy costs are yet another example of environmental racism in St. Louis. While this issue and the issues we've explored in previous weeks were created as a result of structural problems like affordable housing and disinvestment in Black communities, home energy costs have a direct impact on people immediately in the form of monthly utility bills. And like food apartheid, this leads to those who are least able to pay bearing the highest costs. There are home energy costs that all renters and homeowners have to pay to keep their homes powered, like gas and electric. Think of your monthly bill from Ameren Inspire. While everyone has home energy costs, not everyone has a high home energy burden. Energy burden refers to the percentage of household income spent on utilities. 25% of all US households face a high energy burden, where households pay more than 6% of their entire income on energy bills. And 13% of all US households face a severe energy burden, where a household pays more than 10% of its entire income on energy bills. When utility burdens become high and take up a large share of one's income, some people cut back on basic necessities like food and medicine. People also cut back on heating and cooling, keeping their homes too cold in the winter or too hot in the summer to be healthy or safe. In St. Louis, the burden of high home energy costs is majorly borne by Black and low-income residents. Nearly 52% of low-income households and 48% of Black households in St. Louis face energy burdens that are more than twice the citywide median. Even worse is the fact that out of the 48 largest US cities, St. Louis is the 6th highest energy burden on Black households. High home energy costs disproportionately affect Black households because of systemic racism. And this is clearly demonstrated by the hot cities created through redlining. Redlining was a practice by the federal government where neighborhoods were rated on a scale from best to hazardous. In areas deemed to be definitely declining or hazardous, the areas in red and yellow on this map, banks would not offer loans to buy homes because to the banks, it seemed like a risky investment. Redlining has had a disastrous effect on housing to this day. Disinvestment in communities deemed to be hazardous most often meant disinvestment in Black communities. As cities developed, areas that were invested in were predominantly white, and these areas created parks and green spaces. In areas labeled hazardous, no such investment occurred, and instead of trees, grass, and plants, these communities were paved with little to no green spaces and instead have roads, large interstates, and parking lots that absorb and radiate heat. And this impact of disinvestment is severe. Today, redline neighborhoods are significantly hotter than nearby neighborhoods. A recent study of more than 100 American cities found that redline neighborhoods are about 5 degrees hotter than unredlined neighborhoods in the same city. For example, in Baltimore, there are differences of 14 degrees between areas with parks and green space and the redline downtown areas. This disproportionate impact of redlining on city temperatures is disastrous for health. According to the CDC, heat kills more than 700 people annually in the US, making heat the #1 killer for weather-related deaths per year. With redline areas being multiple degrees hotter, this burden is borne more substantially by Black residents. Not only do the hot temperatures make it difficult to be outside in the hot months, it also makes it more expensive to cool down homes. Further adding to this issue is the lack of efficient housing in areas that have been redlined and suffer from disinvestment, which means that it's already more expensive to cool down these homes without the extra burden of the cities being extra hot. But high home energy costs are perpetuated by more than just redlining. So what's making these home energy costs so high? The physical drivers of high energy costs center on inefficient housing. Houses that are inefficient leak heat and air and have to churn out more money to keep appliances running. All that money that's spent goes right out the door, windows, and cracks. Unsealed and inefficient housing also has health effects linked with air pollution and mold. Running inefficient systems and appliances leads to increased energy use and increased air pollution. These inefficient systems can also lead to the growth of mold in homes. We know the fixes. They can be as simple as replacing single-pane windows or inefficient appliances, or caulking areas that have cracks near windows or doors that let cold or hot air out. And even though these fixes may seem simple, they can be costly when added up, which relates to the socioeconomic elements that drive home energy burdens. Inability to afford these upfront costs of increasing energy efficiency perpetuates the problem of those who are least able to paying the highest prices. If you can't afford the upfront cost of getting a new efficient refrigerator or water heater, you will continue to pay higher prices every month on your utility bill. Chronic economic hardship due to persistent low income will also increase someone's energy burden. As your income gets lower, the percent spent on fixed costs like electricity get higher. And sudden economic hardship can also add to this problem, like severe illness, unemployment, or a disaster event like COVID. Additional burdens exist in the form of behavioral barriers. For example, although there are some assistance programs available, there's lack of education and outreach programs, and many people may be unaware of the help that's available to them. On a broader policy level, utility rate design practices, like having high fixed charges on every monthly bill, limits the ability of people to conserve and reduce energy use to decrease their utility bills. And most detrimental, because tenants pay for utilities, landlords have no incentive to update appliances or make insulation better. There are programs in St. Louis to help with the high home energy burdens that Black and low income residents face. But still, the disparities in high energy burdens persist. One of the programs available is the federal government's Weatherization Assistance Program, which provides services such as installing insulation, sealing and repairing ducts, and tuning and repairing heating and cooling units. These upgrades can reduce the cost of fuel, electricity, and natural gas by upwards of 25% per dwelling. Eligibility for this program is based on income. So for example, a 4-person household is eligible with an annual income of no more than $49,200. The state of Missouri also provides assistance to low-income households through the federally funded Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Despite the promise of the LIHEAP program, the funding only reaches 20 to 25% of households and fell $23 million short of ensuring that St. Louisans living 50% below the poverty line could afford their energy bills in 2018. Another resource is Cool Down, Heat Up St. Louis, a nonprofit charity that focuses on helping area elderly and disabled people and low-income families with their delinquent utility bills in the St. Louis region. Ameren also offers some programs like rebates and home energy audits for home energy efficiency upgrades for qualifying customers. They also have a bill support program funded by Ameren's ratepayers. And because of COVID, Ameren has what they call a clean slate program. So this is where a household pays 25% of their balance due and the rest is forgiven if the household is at 250% of the federal poverty line and applies to the correct procedure. And upon my research, that procedure looked pretty confusing. And speaking of the resources that helped during COVID, the burden of high home energy costs has been increased by this pandemic. There was a moratorium on utility disconnections as people lost their jobs and governments realized that many would be unable to pay their utility bills and that could lead to utility cutoffs in the middle of a pandemic. But now, even though the economic downturn is still severe and many people don't have jobs, the moratorium in St. Louis have been lifted. As summer months got hotter and now as the fall and winter months get colder, energy bills increase and people have to make the choice between being safe and comfortable indoors and hiking up utility bills they may be unable to pay. This decision is made even harder because of the increased amount of time people stay home because of COVID. The stay-at-home orders increase the cost households have to pay for utilities. A recent study done in New York City apartments during COVID found a 23% increase in use of electricity. And that increased use leads to increased costs. As people stay home to decrease their risk of exposure to COVID, they're likely increasing their utility bills, a burden many St. Louisans may be unable to bear. And again, this burden is disproportionate. Those in redline areas of the city face an increased burden of keeping their homes cool generally. And now, because of COVID and the stay-at-home orders, these households' energy bills are even higher. To conclude, high home energy costs burden households because of systemic environmental racism. At every turn, low-income and Black residents in St. Louis face higher costs on their wallets and on their health because of structural disparities in access to affordable, safe, and efficient housing. While the government and community are making efforts to decrease the burden of high home energy costs, these efforts have been unable to alleviate or solve much of the problem. We hope this series can start a discussion about how we can decrease energy burdens in St. Louis. We are here tonight to listen to your experiences, your suggestions, your concerns, and your thoughts about solutions. Thank you for letting me speak with you tonight. I'm finished and I'm going to pass it off to the next portion of the event.
All right, we're back. Thanks so much for those really good presentations. Get some like snaps, reactions, etc. Thank you so much. I forgot to say this earlier, but we are actually going to have some time for questions. So I definitely want to open up the space. If you have any questions for Gbad or Anna Catherine about the things they've been talking about, or maybe for more information on other resources, please feel free to either unmute yourselves, put them in the chat, but I'll leave the space open for a little bit if anyone has any questions.
Hi. I'm Sister Dolores. I work at St. Anthony of Padua Church. So I work with a lot of immigrants, and some of them, of course, are undocumented. So I was wondering which of the programs that were mentioned with help available are specifically federally funded, which the undocumented cannot access then.
So I'm not entirely sure. There are a lot of resources in the area. There's a link that Callie put in the chat that has a list of kind of comprehensive resources in Missouri. The Cool Down or Heat Up St. Louis charities seem to not be based on federal funding, but more on private dollars. But I'm not completely sure about that. So I would need to do more research to have a better answer about where to get money that's not based on federal funding.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna Catherine. Are there any other questions? All right, well, that is fine. Again, thank you all so much for those presentations. I think they're going to be really great jumping off point for us and our conversations. So now we're going to break out into groups. So now we've heard what the problem is. We've heard a lot of the reasons why the problem is happening, what's going on. But what we really want to talk about more is how do we fix it? And we want to know from you, from people who live in the community, what are the things that you feel like would help you in your community? What are the ways that you want to see these things solved, these issues solved? So we're going to go into a time, breakout rooms, where we really encourage you to talk and be open about your experiences or the experiences that you know of others who have, who are living these realities that we talked about today. And then the things that you would want for them or for yourself in those situations, the things that would really help, the things that would really help to mitigate the harm that comes from these things and solve these issues, especially the ones that are at such a systemic level. So I'm going to quickly put the discussion questions in the chat while everyone has them, so I can do that. And then your group leaders will have them as well. So we're going to be in this space until about 7:45, so there's plenty of time to talk. And I just want to encourage everyone to really be open. I know it can be hard to feel vulnerable in spaces, but this is our third time doing this. We had really great conversation last week, and we're really just coming together for this to be a safe space for us to have these open and honest conversations. And they're really, really fruitful when the community is really engaged and really wants to be a part of the discussion. So Ken, if you want to go ahead and put us in our groups. All right. See if we have anyone else popping in here.
Madison, while we wait, I just want to mention Dolores. I don't know if you left contact information in the sign-in sheet. I would be more than happy to either myself or one of the students do a little research into your question so we can get you a little bit better, more precise answer. And just
that'd be great. Yeah.
Directly. Okay. I can also check with, I don't know if you know Katie Myers. She used to head the MICA project. She now runs the immigration clinic at WashU. So she's very plugged into the immigrant community and knows a lot about resources for immigrant and immigrant families in St. Louis. Could also check with her. And so we'll kind of do all that and then get back to you with the answer to your question. So
that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ken. Well, welcome to Breakout Room Run. Really excited to have you all here, especially those of you who are coming back for another meeting. Really appreciate that. So I want to give us some time to quickly just kind of go around and say your name, your pronouns, and this might be a loaded answer. A one-word response. I was going to say to how you're feeling today, but that might not be a lot. So a one-word response to what you're excited about for fall. So I'll do, or I guess it doesn't have to be one word. It could be like a sentence, but I don't want like a paragraph. So, and I can start to give an example. My name is Madison Orozco. My pronouns are she, her. And I am excited about being able to wear a jacket and like a vest outside and not feel too hot. And I'm going to pass it on to someone, and then after you go, you can pass it on to someone else. So I'm going to pass it to Anna.
Hi, so my name's Anna and I go by she, her pronouns. And I'm also very excited to be able to wear sweaters, and I'm excited for the brisk weather. And I'm going to pass it on to Dolores.
So Dolores Sanchez, she, her, and I just love the colors of the fall and the different scenes you see around the city. It's so beautiful. And I'll pass it on to Zach. And I'm got to go get my phone turned off because the alarm keeps going off. I'll be right back.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Zach. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm excited for stew season. I'm a big stew guy. And I will send it over to Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Young. I am a camper, so fall is wonderful camping weather, so I'll be doing that almost every weekend. And who hasn't? I'll pass it to Janice.
Hi, my name is Janice. Okay, great. Hi, my name is Janice. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm excited for the fall for, I don't know, the best part's already gone, the leaves changing, I guess. I'm not a super fall kid. I hate being cold.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Lori, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lori. She, her. I love hiking, and this is the best time of year for hiking.
Great. And then Ubad, you haven't gone yet, right?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Ugbad, she, hers. Fall, this is going to sound really very stereotypical, very cliche, but I love a pumpkin spice latte. Oh my gosh, it really does the job for me. I haven't had one in a while. Maybe I'll go treat myself tomorrow, but I love a nice seasonal Starbucks drink. It really does it for me. I'll pass it off to Ken.
So the disadvantage of going last is all of the good stuff has already been taken, and literally every idea that came to mind, somebody has already taken. So my name is Ken Miller. I use he, him, his pronouns. So I'm going to go with fall brings the end of the semester. And so Zach and Ugbad and other students who are not here will be out of my hair fairly soon and not my problem anymore. And so I do look forward to that.
Oh, love that. I'm still laughing at Zach that you said it's stew season. I haven't heard that one as much, so I love that. Well, I'm really glad that we're all in this space together. We want to make sure that we capture these conversations. So I'm going to be recording this conversation. This is just going to be for our internal use. If anything we want to use like externally, we would reach out to you, get a release, etc. But I just want everyone to know. So if you don't want to be on it, you can, turn off your camera, but I'm going to start the recording now. All right, and so for those of you who haven't been here before, at these events, we break out into these rooms and have deeper conversations about, people's experiences with what the presenters talk about, and then also to kind of hear about community-based solutions. And something I just kind of want to preface the space with is that, we saw when we put the neighborhoods in and when everyone's introducing themselves, like people are from all over, and people have really different experiences in different parts of the city. So I just want to encourage us to, speak to our experiences, but also to recognize that, my experience might not necessarily mean this other experience doesn't exist, etc. Let's just keep this kind of like a space where we do feel really open and safe to have these conversations and to really listen, especially to those who are in the spaces where they are really experiencing this or have experienced this. And so we'll just kind of leave a space for that. So does everyone see the questions in the chat, or should I re-put them in there? I'm gonna read them out loud, but good. Okay. So the first question is, do you or does someone you know live in an area with limited access to healthy food? And it's kind of like all together, this is going to be like, what was that experience, or what is that experience like? And what do you think needs to change to stop this from happening?
At St. Anthony's, there in Dutchtown off of Merrimack, we have two like food markets on the street, one on the corner with Grand, the other one kind of closer to Broadway. But they're more of a, well, the one has, you know, sandwiches and stuff, but there would be more, you go grab a soda and a bag of chips kind of place. And the Schnucks is down the, you know, probably at least half a mile down Grand or up Grand. And so when people don't have transportation, so, you know, our food pantry does a great job in terms of providing fresh food and meats and, you know, much beyond just canned goods. But at the same time, you know, if people are taking the bus, you know, they're given so much, it's difficult for them to even get that home. So transportation, you know, combined with the, you know, we need stores closer to where people live.
Yeah, definitely. Quick show of hands. How many of y'all live within like either 3 to 5 minutes driving distance of a grocery store or within walking distance of a grocery store? Raise your hand. Okay. And how many of you have always lived in a space where you have had pretty easy access to a grocery store? Okay. Yeah. So I think this is like the reality. Sometimes we can hear this and it's not always like the areas and the spaces that we're in or that we live in. But Dolores, you talk about, you know, the spaces that you work in, the people that you work with, those are those realities. So I know for myself, I used to live in a community that had one Aldi that was probably about 10-ish minutes away, not convenient walking, took the bus there to get groceries a few times, and it was not that fun. It was really difficult to try. I couldn't get everything I needed. I had to like sacrifice things that I wanted because I simply couldn't carry them the whole way. There was a Family Dollar right near where I lived, but that's severely lacking in any sort of, you know, nutritious food. And half the time it wasn't even stocked anyways because they were afraid of people stealing all the time. So there wasn't even anything there. And then I lived in Old North St. Louis, and I moved to South City, Northampton area. I have a Walgreens across the street, 3 Schnucks within like 2 minutes, like 3 different Aldis that I can choose to go to. All of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with all of the opportunity that I have. And that's just something that made me, I already knew it and I'd heard it and I had read it, but in that moment I was like, I already have a car. Like my privilege, I already have a lot of things that enable me to get what I need, but that's not really what others have. And that's, you know, that's a problem. Like, what do we need to do to fix that? Like, what needs to change?
Is that a question for the group?
I mean, yes, just the same question, echoing it again. Like, you know, what's the experience like? What needs to change to stop this from happening?
I'd like to see if I could address what needs to change from a very high level. I work at the Regional Council of Governments and often get to present on issues related to sustainability, of which food is one of them. And there's just a general lack of regional concern for people that govern areas outside of food apartheid areas, that it's really an issue for the neighborhood, or really an issue for the region. So they kind of just slough it off and say it's the market reacting to market conditions, and nothing ever happens. So there's huge issues that contribute to it, with regional leadership being one, and these, you know, hard to deal with market issues when grocery stores leave because of crime or perceived crime, or, you know, whatever other issues, and, you know, they could come up with lots of them. So there's big systemic things and leadership issues that need to change to fix some of the issues. And I'm finished.
Thanks. I think that is very telling, the sense of doesn't seem like it's a big problem that's affecting too many people, or at least too many people that the people in charge seem to care about. So then it's not really an issue that gets resolved. What are some other people's thoughts about what we can do to deal with these food apartheids and this limited access to healthy, affordable food?
Hi, I think. Oh,
Go ahead.
I think it's a really super tough question. As someone who's lived like in or near food deserts probably my whole life. I'm currently in Chicago, and I've been born and raised in Chicago my whole life. I'm a WashU student though, which is why I'm here. I think it's super tough in terms of just pinpointing a solution because it's I don't know, I like can't even think of a real like tangible solution to a food desert because there's so many problems that apply to it. It's like the infrastructure of a community, but there's also economic freedom or liberty that these people in this community have. Like, yeah, a really big problem in terms of food deserts is like just not having the ability to travel the distance to the good grocery store that's just outside of your community because you don't have a car or you can't afford a car, and then your city hasn't put in the infrastructure for a good public transportation system. In Chicago, luckily you can get pretty anywhere via our public transportation system, but in St. Louis, that obviously couldn't be further from the truth. So
I was just wondering, if there are mobile food markets in St. Louis and where they go. Anybody knows?
Yeah, I know I've heard of, I can't remember the name of it. So, but I know like at one point when I lived in Old North, there was a mobile food market that had come through, and it was kind of like advertised on Facebook. And I feel like people who were kind of in the know knew about it, or, had seen that post that day. But that's another thing. It's like, how do you get the word out to communities? A lot of people who want to help communities are not always from or inside those communities. And what does it look like to work in communities like that? Like, you need to engage the people there on the ground. How do you let them know what's going on? So I don't know, Uqbal, if you know anything about, I'm totally putting you on the spot, so it's fine if not, but anything about those type of mobile food things, or also just like any other things that people have thought of that could be helpful that we could use to kind of like bounce ideas off or like spark some conversation.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that's a really great question, Dolores. I know, just like Madison had said, I saw some mobile food markets that were in the south, sorry, I'm trying to think geographically, southwest part of St. Louis City, but I haven't seen any updates regarding anything currently that is accessible to community members. And that's also another thing that we can look up and further explore to see if there are current mobile food trucks that are around, that we can even share that information and those resources with you all. But I think, Madison, to your question of things or possibilities to explore to expand food access in St. Louis, I think for me, just even doing this research, one thing that I really found that was so interesting was actually Missouri is the only state that hasn't expanded. In the Women, Infant, and Children program, mothers can, or parents can essentially use that food support to purchase fresh fruit and fresh vegetables at farmers markets. But Missouri is the only state that hasn't expanded that to allow mothers to purchase using WIC at farmers markets. So what Erin was saying, it's these like really high level decisions and policies that are put in place, and you think about how systemically that people, and essentially what we're speaking of in this whole entire series, is it's low income people, it's communities of color that are being placed in situations where they have no choice but to go to the corner store to try to get some milk, maybe some bread, whatever the case may be, And if that's not the case, they're definitely not getting a Trader Joe's in their neighborhood and not a Whole Foods. You know what I mean? So it's these systemic issues that we're really trying to explore, and the power of community and cultivating that when it comes to food access. In my research that I've really found was these community gardens that are just, that people have to expand for themselves in their communities in order to get some type of decent vegetables or fruits in their community. So definitely community gardens. What I found a lot of was just finding peace in community, and whether that was people offering rides to each other to get to a grocery store, or doing these community gardens, but a lot of it was in those spaces as well.
Thanks. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm gonna bounce off of that and say, so I've lived in St. Louis now for 2 years. Prior to that, I lived in Columbia, Missouri, and they have a program there where if you are on food stamps and you go to the farmer's market, you can get double the produce for the price. So that was a really neat program that I was pretty sad that they didn't have something similar here in St. Louis.
Yeah, definitely. Like that seems like something that, would just really help that access. I wanted to ask, since you brought up the community gardens, how many, if any of y'all have lived in communities that have or here in St. Louis or other places that have had these types of community gardens, or if you've seen these types of spaces used as kind of communal food spaces before.
I've seen 2 or 3 in South City, but I don't, I'm not connected with them to know, how they're run or if they're working well. I know at least a couple of years ago, the food pantry director for St. Anthony's was growing tomato plant seedlings, should get maybe this tall, plant them in January, February, a warmer house kind of thing, whatever they call it. And then, when they were big enough and it was warm enough to get them planted, or just in the pot, take them home and then, have their, eventually have tomatoes then. But I know that, trying to do that, in the city with the ground we have, you really have to, put a lot of money into getting good dirt there to help grow the vegetables or whatever you're growing. So, that makes it challenging for a family to be able to do that unless they've got, resources already.
Yeah, definitely. The neighborhood I used to live in, they did have a farmer's market or like a community garden. And then they had like a little mini farmer's market on the weekends where they would sell those vegetables. And they did do the double up on the food money, which was really great. But again, that Old North area is definitely a part of kind of the northern city in St. Louis, but it's also an area where they have been able to kind of attract a lot of the attention around like revitalization, have been able to get a lot of grants and like pour into that. And that's great, but not every community has that level, of advocacy on its behalf. So what does it look like to, build up that same level of advocacy? Because the reality is the resources exist. They exist in this, in our city, in the state, they are there, but, people aren't asking for them in the, the direct way that people in government need you to ask for them, basically, to or kind of the back route ways that you have to ask for them to get what you need. So I think a lot of us have also been talking about, the systemic problems. And so we also need to think about what does it look like to target, our elected officials? Like, what are some of the things that we can be asking of them? How can they control, or how can they impact, what areas get business, like how they once did with redlining in a way that was really, really detrimental to so many communities.
Well, one thing that might help with several areas that the whole report addresses is that it's so hard to start a small business in the city. the hurdles that the city throws at you and the kinds of inconsistent enforcement of city regulations that inspectors put on small businesses is a huge hurdle for people to, you know, self-empower their own neighborhoods to start the businesses that they need. So one thing that we need to talk to our elected officials about in the city is streamlining business permits, occupancy permits, and inspection permits, because it's really chaotic, and I've heard that from many people who have small businesses. And also, I don't know, I'm not quite sure about the details of it, but I grew up in Chicago too, Janice, and on the South Side. And the Chicago food market has a very robust small grocery store and small market kind of environment. So it's probably partially because it might be easier to start small businesses in Chicago, or maybe it's a population density. But you don't see the kinds of small markets that could empower neighborhoods here as much as you do in Chicago. So I don't know exactly what the cause of that is. Maybe I thought maybe the big markets like Schnucks and Dierbergs might have cornered the supply market and make it harder to get wholesale prices into small groceries. But that's also another thing that we could look at, is how much those big grocery stores that won't locate in the city hamper other grocery stores or small markets from starting up in the city.
Madison, I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. And thanks for that, Erin.
When you said you would live like 10 minutes away from the grocery store, did that impact like you or people that you know, for example, like buying fresh fruits on the regular and buying more like processed foods, for example, because of like the distance that it was? Was that like a big impact?
I would say definitely, because I mean, luckily the grocery store that was close was an Aldi as opposed to a Schnucks. Even though Aldi's produce quality is not always the best, it is still like at least good for the first couple of days, and Aldi is significantly more affordable than Schnucks. But I would say yes, I think it really impacted, because you really had to, you know, think about everything that you wanted to get. Like I had a car towards the end of when I was there, so that kind of transformed the game for me. But before that, I was all public transportation all the time, and I just didn't want to lug like 4 or 5 like bags home of stuff and, you know, have to wait 20 or 30 minutes for the next bus to come, because bus routes in certain areas only run every hour, maybe every 30 minutes if you get lucky. So I think that definitely did, you know, have an impact. And if I had always lived in a community like that, I would never have the expectation of such easy access to things. And that's also, you know, part of the problem. Because if you don't ever expect that that's what you should be able to have, then like, how do you know that's what you should be pushing for?
Thank you.
Well, I want to also leave some space for us to talk about the high home costs that AK or the Anna Catherine discussed as well, because I think that's something that some people have that's really been their experience. Their, you know, like that choice to turn on the heat in the winter or not, to turn on that air conditioning in the summer to give you like a bit of relief from the St. Louis humid Three Rivers sun or not. And so wanted to kind of pose the same question. Is this like your experience, or is this the experience of someone have you known? And, you know, what impact do you think that has, and what do we need to do differently?
I have not been in that experience personally, but I know people. I am a recovering landlord. And I tried to do the right thing. I bought high efficiency furnaces and air conditioners, and whenever I could, I replaced windows, but I about went broke. And you can't manage these old buildings in the city and do what you need to do to make it efficient for your tenants, and still, you know, not go broke yourself. So there's just, you know, I don't have a solution, but I had really bad experiences being a landlord, and it almost bankrupted me trying to do the right thing. So something in that system is broken, even for the people that want to do the right things.
Yeah, going off of that, I come from like the northern New Jersey, New York area, and I definitely see it being a pretty big problem where I come from in many parts of different cities, like Newark or New York City. And in a lot of cases, even when landlords do want to be able to help out, sometimes when like buildings are kind of just old and the landlords don't have the kind of money to be able to help. And sometimes sometimes the incentives aren't just there. And I saw this being like a really big problem for a lot of people in the area. And I think it's something that really needs to be looked into.
Aaron, I'm kind of curious, since you've got experience as a landlord and almost bankrupting yourself, you know, in trying to do good things for your tenants. Do you know, did you ever look to see, you know, some of these, you know, like with a lot of these things, you know, there's programs out there to help with the issue. Do you know whether or not those programs are available for rental housing? So if you're a landlord, for example, and you know, it might be beneficial to have your units, you know, weatherized, or to, you know, put in more efficient, you know, heating and cooling equipment or whatever. Are you eligible as a landlord for, you know, weatherization assistance, you know, rebates from Ameren for higher efficiency stuff? Or those things that are only available to homeowners? Because I honestly don't know.
It's a mixed bag. The Ameren incentives were no good for me, because it was mentioned earlier that the tenants paid their own utilities. So I would get no benefit from doing an incentive program. And if a furnace went out and I had to replace it, I just had to do it. And since I didn't live there, that kind of rent or that kind of assistance was not available. And then there was a lot of other weatherization programs were not available to landlords. The tenants could have applied for them, but that would have been another huge kind of weird hassle for the tenants to have to go through to apply for something through like the Urban League to get their windows replaced, even though they were windows on the building that they didn't own. So it's hard, especially if you're just, you know, a small time guy like me. It was just me and my dad with 2 buildings. The scale of things didn't work for us either.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Ken, because I think this kind of brings this dichotomy, and I think I didn't specifically say it, but we addressed it on the other, with talking about food security as well. It's almost like there's like it has to be like a multifaceted approach. Dolores, you're talking a lot about like, you know, food pantries, and we talked about other things that are potentially happening in communities to help, like, you know, the people in those communities living in that reality right now. So that has to be happening. And then we also need the systemic change, and we need we need to change the laws that incentivize like where businesses are able to come or how small business owners are able to operate. And I think in the same way, you know, with these higher home costs, we need the programs that can, you know, provide support for people immediately when they need it. People should not be having to choose between, you know, turning on the heat in the winter or not. That should never have to be a choice anyone has to make. And so we need that direct support. But then also, you know, if all of the houses are extremely energy inefficient in that way, and no matter how much assistance we're able to give, we're going to have to keep giving that. So we need to also have policies that incentivize like investments in, you know, revitalizing these homes and stuff. So I think all these approaches are so like multifaceted, because you can't just work on the policy, but you also can't just work on the ground level. But sometimes it's a lot to just do one of those sides. So like, how do we, you know, that's always the question of organizing. Other thoughts that people have just about, you know, about these questions, about things, you know, solutions, but also just kind of like thoughts in general, reflecting on these conversations, just how, how you see these problems and what you think can be done.
I'm curious if any of you are involved with Metropolitan Congregations United, MCU. Madison, is it through your church or through Dutchtown South or?
It's through, I work at Close the Workhouse and our City Defenders, and so we collaborate on a lot of things between those two groups.
Because they have an environmental justice beginning effort, I think, in Jennings. And so they're beginning to promote that area for environmental justice. And they're seeing it through the racial lens. So they're very much in line with what, all these presentations are about.
Awesome. Thank you. We can definitely I would definitely love to reach out to them and see more of what they're doing, what their approach is. So thanks so much for that, Dolores.
Mm-hmm. And I think they're collaborating with the Sierra Club as well. On that.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah. So I bet Ashton and Leah, who other organizers of these events, probably know about that too. So thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Other kind of thoughts. So we're going to end in about 3 minutes, but just kind of closing thoughts about, this conversation we've been having.
I definitely agree with you, Madison, when you said that it definitely is a multifaceted approach. We need to look into how can we redo the buildings in a way, or fix the buildings to kind of fix the energy sources, to kind of fix the cooling in a way. And also the kind of just like the policy measures that make this more affordable and that make it easier for landlords to kind of do it, but also how the city is structured, increasing vegetation in the city, allowing, the heat island effect to go down, kind of just like the problem itself, like the cause and the effect. I feel like both really has to be looked at. If we can increase vegetation in the city and just other stuff that causes that heat island effect.
Yeah, and I think for me, reflecting on doing the food apartheid presentation, if there's one thing that I can say to you all, definitely explore even I think for my presentation, I hope that it came across this way. A really important part was using the word food apartheid as opposed to food desert. I think that that's really important in these conversations, because the way that food apartheid encompasses the whole picture of race, economics, income, geography, it really does make a difference in how we approach these things. And to all of your points of how we need to assess this, and this being like a multidisciplinary and a multifaceted approach to solve these issues, it'll definitely it'll make a difference. So the next time you hear someone say food desert, say, hey, that's not the word. We got to use food apartheid. So if there's one thing that you all walk away from this evening, definitely that. I hope that that's it.
Thanks so much.
Becky Denny is typing in her using pronouns she, her. She doesn't have audio, so she's going to type, and then she wrote suggestions for education. Is that that you're wanting to learn more suggestions for education, or are you suggesting that we come up with suggestions for education? And I'll just wait for her to put that in the chat. And while I wait, I will say I'm feeling heavy. I think just the knowledge in reality what's happening is just kind of heavy. But I appreciate everyone taking their time on this Wednesday evening. I put the questions in the chat to kind of start us off And so I will say, just kind of read off the first one. And please jump in if you want to share. Apologies, my husband's walking in with groceries right now. But I would also say that one community agreement that didn't come up that I always like is step forward, step back. So if you feel like you are being really quiet and you have a lot of thoughts, but you haven't really shared, consider stepping forward and sharing your thoughts. And if you feel like you've shared a lot of thoughts and you're like someone like me who needs to be reminded to step back, maybe think step back, maybe wait that beat to let somebody else jump. So I'm going to step back now, and with the question, do you or someone you know live in an area with limited access to healthy food? And I will step forward as Becky and read what she sent me. Yes, I'm okay with food and energy, but I don't have a good ideas to help others. And so I think we all will speak together to get those good ideas going. Thank you. So again, do you or someone you know live in an area with limited access to healthy food?
So I would say, for me, I don't live in an area with limited access to healthy food, but my friends on the north side have a lot of issues with like lack of transportation and not having their own car necessarily, and it being really difficult to get to a place where they can get healthy groceries, and the quality of groceries that they can get at the stores that are available to them are really different than the quality in other, like people talk a lot about the different Schnucks or the kinds of produce that you can get in the different neighborhoods is pretty stark. Yeah, I mean, I'll leave it there. We can move on to solutions later.
Thank you for that. And yeah, the transportation versus access question is, and quality. Anybody else want to share some feelings, thoughts?
Well, I grew up on the north side in St. Louis, and I have plenty of friends who still live on the north side. My mom still lives on the north side, and access is definitely an issue. And like the other young lady said about the quality, like sometimes the only places that are open are convenience stores, and they may have like 2 apples and a banana and a bunch of canned goods that are dusty just so that they can qualify for the food stamp program. They have to meet certain requirements to have certain amounts of choices of fresh food, and they consider, canned fruits a fruit. It's just depressing sometimes when you go to the stores. There's access to dollar burgers and 2 for $1 tacos, but not access to anything that's really good for you. If you're trying to get something to eat late at night, sometimes you don't have any choices other than fast food on the north side. So the access is really something that needs to be addressed. I'm finished.
Thank you for sharing with all of that. I will say from like my perspective, I have heard that a lot of development requirements for convenience stores are things to go up in different communities. Community members will put a requirement of a healthy food option. And I had not made the connection that canned food is being considered in that access to fruits and vegetables. So that's and thank you for making that connection for me. Does anyone else have something they want to share on their experience with access to healthy food. I'll pose this to everybody, but since Jess and Amir have shared, I'll ask the question either through your own personal experience or listening to those personal experiences. What do you think is something that could have helped or would help increase access to good quality foods, be that transportation, varieties, everything? There's no idea too big or too small.
Well, the most exciting idea I've heard recently is community members getting together and talking a lot about opening up their own grocery stores. So people owned, people operated, and I think there's some interesting projects that are getting funded along these lines. So that is super exciting. The mobile markets, I think, are kind of a nice stopgap measure. I mean, I don't think it's a permanent solution. And then working on infrastructure for gardens, community gardens, and I think Gateway Greening was floating a new program to install home gardens for folks in their backyards, which I think could alleviate some of the food access issues. So, I mean, it's not like there's one solution, like it's a multi-pronged situation where hopefully we can come at it from a lot of different angles. And organizations like City Greens, I think, are really great, where there's like tiered memberships, and so it's accessible for low-income folks, and it's subsidized by folks of higher incomes. So to make things like organic foods or healthy foods within reach of low-income folks.
Yeah, I feel like I know I've heard of a co-op, which is community-owned grocery store that is opening up on the north side, which is going to be very helpful. And I think definitely with Food Apartheid, like green spaces and community gardens are always part of that conversation. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions, sparks that have come up when it comes to gardens, or I'm sorry.
Where is the community grocery store going to be opening? Where is that?
I will find that out for you. It just got like the final hump that it had to get over, I think, last month. But it's been a long time. Sorry, my cat. Long time like developing. Okay, so it is the Old North Grocery. It'll be on North 13th Street. So I'm not familiar with that spot.
Is it Old North Provisions?
No, it's called Old North Grocery. It's a co-op. And it is in 63106.
Is it Mark that's doing that?
Keith McCard is the name that is on Facebook, but then it looks like maybe it has been posted in a while, so maybe I'm on the wrong thing. Because Mark does sound like the name I remember from this.
That's really close to Old North Provisions on 14th Street.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Maybe I
Which has
am.
been around for a while, and I think is a co-op. Is that right? I heard that there was like a new project. I'm not, but I don't know the name or any information about it.
Yeah, same. But I do know I can get that information, so I'm gonna make a little note here to find that, or to have a WashU law student find that, if I'm being honest.
See, that to me, that's just, that addresses like, that's not really the north side. When I think of the north side, that's kind of like mid-north. That's kind of an area that's, Old North Provisions is catty corner from Crown Candy, and Crown Candy pulls people from the suburbs, and that's not like the north side that's really, I feel, affected with. I do think, see that could be a Lila area, because there's not really a grocery store nearby. But when I think of the north side and where people go to Family Dollars to buy food, you'll see carts full of food, and it's not really nutritious food. It's, pre-mixed things and things that aren't really healthy. When I think of wanting to really address the needs of the north side community, I don't really, I guess maybe because I didn't grow up there, but I think more further north.
No, I very much agree with that. I'm trying to find where that info was that I saw originally, but I do know the one that is being built. Taja Phonics, who's an excellent food justice organizer, she was part of the bringing it in and placing where it is. So I do know it is in truly Old North. I just don't know more detail. I know in like during COVID-19, I just remembered like that's when the grant money was coming in, and they got the loans they needed to help get it off.
Cool. I can get in touch with Tasha. I know her.
Okay, great. Yeah, she would be able to answer that like that for you.
Cool. Yeah, and that means maybe because she was working with a group that was trying to do something closer to Fairgrounds Park, which would be north side. North side.
Yeah, Fairground Park sounds so familiar for this.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, then that project might be what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing that from the neighborhood I'm from in San Antonio, which has its own food apartheid, a issue we went into was when they were bringing in new produce and such, they did not consult the neighborhood, and it was not produce we ate. So there was like it was just like mangoes and such, where it was like I just remember a lot of friends being like, that's a weird looking fruit and I'm not going to eat that. And it was just like they would have been better off just bringing like pineapple, like approachable, or samples mango, and then I would have eaten all the mango. But that's come up.
Not culturally appropriate.
Yeah, it's just so I think always community led. Kind of switching gears over, especially we have AK here with the home energy costs, and I feel like that's just such a St. Louis thing with our old brick buildings, and everything was built in 1904. So does anyone have any experience with like living in a location with high energy costs, or feeling like, cold in your apartment and there's just nothing you can do to make it warmer except turning that thermostat up?
Well, I hate to hog the conversation, but I can relate to all that. I bought an old house in the Central West End, right on the edge. It still has like original windows, and it was built in 1895, so a little bit before 1904, but it's definitely drafty. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's my baby, it's my project. I'm working on it little by little, but it's definitely costly to heat. I have a couple of window AC units, and when she was talking initially about how you live in a house that's so hot, I think about it every summer, how it's like I can only really live in certain rooms because the rest of the house is just so hot. I barely even go on the third floor because it's just so hot. So it's definitely a challenge to heat and cool older houses.
Thank you. Yeah, the original windows. I am a sucker for the look of original windows. They just are gorgeous. I just moved out of an apartment with mostly original windows from 1947, I think. And I like cracks. Like every winter, I just felt awful for how much heat I knew was escaping. And what that was doing to the environment in general, and just try not to think about the economic cost. But that was a privileged point where I could not think about the economic cost.
Yeah, I also have an old house, so I want to salute anybody else who lives in an old house. Ours is like 1898, and yeah, it definitely has some issues with heat in the summer. The attic is almost uninhabitable, which is unfortunately where I have my computer. So it's there are a lot of fans, and so yeah, I can echo what Amir said. I wouldn't trade it, but you know, I'm lucky enough that it's been able to like fix the things that I really, really needed to fix. I know a lot of people can't.
Being San Antonian, the high summer cost of keeping a space cool, it's a losing battle, I think, anywhere in San Antonio on the like 110-degree days. But every senior gets a box fan, and they're really lightweight, so they can travel room to room with them.
That's nice. Yeah, that really is a good program.
Yeah,
110 degrees out now. How much good a box fan does, but it's better than nothing.
It is paired with wellness checks from police officers during heat waves to the elderly. But yeah, those box fans, I volunteered at a social service center that gave them out for people, and it definitely makes a difference. But living the fan life and the space heater life in St. Louis is very real.
Yeah, and I definitely identified with the part of the presentation where AK, you were talking about the costs of investing in either weatherizing your home or you know, having more efficient appliances. So doing what's better for the environment can often be a higher cost at the initially. So you have to have the capital to be able to make that investment, but then your costs can be lower long term. So it's one of the ways that that low income folks are hit both ways again. So I noticed that like we replaced a couple of our adult pane windows in the house at the beginning of this winter, and it's like hundreds of dollars, and it felt like ugh. But you know, it's all drafty. We're trying to get ready. So yeah, it's a privilege to be able to do stuff like that.
Very real. Yeah, the high cost to make your home efficient, to lower your costs, it's just such a like insurmountable like hurdle to get past. One thing I wanted to lift up from AK's presentation was the point that she made that landlords do not pay utilities and thus have no motivation to update, close those cracks in the windows I had. And no reason to get energy efficient appliances and such. So, with that lens, are there any thoughts on with like landlords and property owners to like put pressure, incentivize them to make those repairs, make those upgrades, invest in their properties? Abby, you've been really quiet, so I'm just going to pick on you, even if you have nothing that you want to say. And share a thought.
It's just weird talking because I'm not in this community, so I don't want to intrude. Thinking about landlord costs and things like that, I grew up outside of Boston, and so kind of having the opposite effect of those hot summer months, we have the freezing cold winter. And how do you take care of, especially in Boston, not only the homeless population in the winter, but individuals in those older apartment buildings that are not well kept up. And a lot of what has happened in that area have been those kind of community check-ins. So no longer relying on like police well-being checks, but relying on community organizations to do that instead. And so there's definitely still a battle. I don't really have an answer to how to fix it. But I know that in our area, it's been through a lot of donations. So you talked about the donations of fans. We do donations of space heaters and things like that. So it's just kind of like the polar opposite. But yeah, that's what I have. I'm still thinking. I've been like trying to find all my documents on my other monitor, but if I have something else, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Yes, the community check-in model is something I'm very interested in. We in St. Louis have had a lot of conversations about alternatives to policing. And so I think, thinking about community organizations stepping in and taking that ownership of checking in on neighbors to ensure that especially our elderly populations are comfortable and safe.
Maybe think about, it seems like it should be a city program offering subsidies or rebates for landlords if they upgrade appliances or make improvements for weatherization and things that are going to have environmental impact and lower costs for utilities. But I don't know if we have the political will, so maybe it could also be a grant-funded nonprofit program. I think that would have a smaller overall pool of funds, and so you'd only you'd hit a certain number of landlords, but then you would be able to have publicity and like get the conversation started and maybe get the idea out there. I don't know if who would fund that, but it seems like the kind of thing that should be a city program.
Yes, there's I think a lot that feels like it should be a city program, I think is our city motto. But the mentioning political will, that's definitely part of this series, is a reminder to everybody that filing opens November 22nd for the mayoral and half the aldermanic seats. I should say half plus one because the 12th is also having a race. So all the odd boards plus our mayor are up for election this time around. And so this series is timed appropriately where we can, they do not decide what the conversation of that race is. We do. We have that political will and power. So that's my soapbox moment for the evening. along that route, I guess, of thinking, I know we've been talking a lot about solutions for these items. What would you all want to, like, if your alderman or your state representative was standing in front of you right now, what would you want them to kind of like take away from something like this about home energy costs and a food apartheid, and or I should say?
I can hop in. So like in researching and preparing for the presentation, you know, like at every single turn, like the stack is, you know, like it's just stacked against Black people and people with low incomes. And, you know, I would tell representatives and aldermen to, you know, like you're in this position where you can like unstack this deck, and you're in the position, like we're in Missouri, in a very landlord friendly state, you're in the position to equalize that and to give tenants more rights and to maybe like put into like the warrant of habitability, which is basically, you know, what you need to have, you know, a lease in an apartment that's safe. Like put something in there that says, you know, you need to be able to have heating or like cooling that doesn't break the bank and that doesn't, you know, export all of the costs you should be dealing with on people who definitely can't afford it. So I would say like you're in this position, like you are the person who has the power in this situation, and you're the person who needs to start doing something about it.
I would also say that it's really important to pay attention to these issues because they're costing us as a society in a major way that's sometimes hidden. And so, you know, for food apartheid, the long-term health costs to populations are huge, and they come back to us as a society. In terms of the heating costs and weatherization, I mean, in terms of global warming, like the costs will be huge long term. So I'm just saying, take a step back and think about it at a societal level, which is your job as a politician. You know, it has immediate impacts in people's individual lives. It also has societal impacts.
Yeah. I think we've got about 3 minutes left if somebody else wants to share.
I kind of have, this is like a random thought, but we do, I'm in the landscape architecture program at Virginia Tech. I don't know if I've met all of you. I wasn't in the meeting last week because I had a meeting with a professor, but we do a lot of work in rural communities of Southwest Virginia. So we're kind of like tucked in the mountains in Appalachia. And a lot of what we talk about with communities is investing where it's needed, not necessarily where it's wanted. And so kind of having that wake up call with community leaders to really understand where the investment is due. And my project is located in St. Louis, so I've just been like studying St. Louis. So it's my privilege to be here tonight with you guys, but I look a lot at the inequities of green space And I had to do, so I went to St. Louis a couple weeks ago, and I had to do a park audit, and just being able to see the inequity of tree cover in St. Louis and how that contributes to the urban heat island effect. So kind of having this like multitude of different factors kind of playing into it, but kind of going back to the investment of landlords. One of the easiest things that we do, or we've done in a few of our communities over here, is just being able to plant like large trees in front of windows. Sorry, I know this is kind of unseen, but having that one-time investment in your green space to be able to lower the temperature of those older homes to kind of win that battle before the bigger battle of efficiency.
This just to sort of see, you know, I guess more of the issues of it within St. Louis and kind of how it really affects lots of different communities. So I'm excited to hear about it all tonight.
Madeline?
I'll pass it to Madeline.
Hi everybody, I use she, her pronouns. I am a fellow at Great Rivers Environmental Law Center, focusing on investigating the lead contamination issue in St. Louis public schools. I just have a broader interest about environmental racism in general, so I'm just here to learn from the community and excited to be here. And I will pass it to the person that says iPhone. Maybe it doesn't say iPhone on your screen, but it does on mine.
That might be me. Okay. I guess my Zoom is not like set up on my iPhone yet. Okay, cool. I'm Forrest. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I have like somewhat of a background in environmental issues. I studied environmental studies in school, and then from there kind of I've done like a few different, I've like done work and volunteering in a few different ways revolving around food justice and food access. Some being like a lot more direct action, and then some more sort of like strategic long-term, kind of involving like gardening and like sharing education and resources around farming and gardening, like urban farming specifically. So I don't know, yeah, I'm definitely here to like listen and just hear more about like what people want and need and like what's the top of people's priority list. And then hopefully be, yeah, also like a resource and someone who can help. Yeah.
I think that just leaves Lauren.
Yes. Hi, I'm Lauren. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a college student at SLU, and I'm here just to learn more about environmental racism.
And then, so we have a series of questions that we wanted to address. And feel free to speak up if you want, or don't if you don't want to. But I'm also a professor, and I am the queen of uncomfortable silences to make people speak up when they don't want to. So just as a warning. So the first question is, do you or does someone you know live in an area with limited access to healthy food? And please, anyone, just jump on in.
Hi. Okay, I also have another activist that focuses on food justice that is at the rally, and I just want to introduce them so we can get connected.
Hey everyone, my name's Mina. I use they, them pronouns. I organize with a group called Uprooted and Rising, and we're a national movement to end Big Food's presence on college campuses. And we're building a group in St. Louis, so hit me up through Maxie, I guess.
I'll share your contact.
Okay.
Hi, Nina.
Would anyone like to speak about living in an area or knowing people that live in an area with limited access to healthy food? Because I can tell you, so now I live in the county, and that's no longer a problem for me or for my neighbors. But I was living in South City, a little bit north of the Dutchtown neighborhood, and that wasn't the case there. There was one grocery store within a mile or so of me, and that grocery store, the produce was always half rotten. It was, once I moved out to the county, that changed significantly. And there are grocery stores, it seems like every couple of blocks, and the produce feels like it's straight off the trucks. And it was a shocking difference to see what a few miles made in the frequency, availability, and quality of the produce available in a neighborhood. And while I'm happy to be a beneficiary of it now, I'm not happy that everyone does not have equal access.
Hi again, I'm still here. I wanted to piggyback on that, like living in like low income areas, I've definitely had to like get food from Family Dollar or like markets, like international markets that only have canned foods. And I definitely personally know what it's like feeling weak from not being able to get enough vitamins and nutrients. And like as like a Black, queer, non-binary artist, it's like kind of how we have to live most of our 20s so that if we can make it to our 30s, that we get there, and even like before it, like in teenage years. I just wanted to put that in there, my shared experience.
Okay, and so we're going to skip the second question then. Let's go to the third. What do you think needs to change to stop this from happening? Stop sort of the frequency and number of food deserts in majority Black neighborhoods in St. Louis.
Hi, everyone. I can speak to both questions. Sorry, I didn't chime in earlier. But my grandmother's neighborhood, my late grandmother's neighborhood's the Ville. And I just remember as a kid having to fish in like Fairground Park and other resources to actually use like catfish and other proteins caught wild to like supplement her food and enough protein. And my dad still to this day, we have cousins that still live in that area who don't even like wait for my dad to bring caught catfish and other things so they don't have resources to get to them in that area to find enough protein. And that triples a different issue because there's high mercury levels in the fish here, there's other pollutants and toxins, so it kind of just doubles down on other health issues that my grandmother's community and my cousins experience. And just to suggestion, obviously, the issue is urban gardening is getting really popular, and just teaching communities how to garden and changing those vacant lots to gardens would be a possible solution. Obviously, there needs to be a lot of upfront work with that, but just sharing some ideas.
Thank you, Madeline. Those are both fantastic ideas, and urban gardening and the use of vacant lots, which of course there are many in the city, is a very, I agree, it's a very good way to minimize the harm that food deserts cause. Would anyone else like to speak to this issue? We really are open ears and would love to hear anything that you have to share.
So one thought that has kind of bounced around in my head, and I don't know, I can't really speak to whether this would work in St. Louis or not. Where I went to law school on the south side of Chicago, there was a co-op that was owned by the people who shopped there. You had to join the co-op. It was a very minimal fee, but basically it was a community-owned grocery store, and then the people who owned the grocery store got to decide what kind of food was being purchased and offered for sale. And it was also sort of doubled as like a community center. Now I think that particular neighborhood has been gentrified and it's changed, but at the time I was in law school there, which was a long time ago, it was a really great resource. And I'm sure there are barriers to getting something like that started, but it seems like that could be sort of a community-owned grocery store could be kind of an option that maybe we should consider thinking about.
That was great, Sarah. Thinking about like how we can like mobilize to get these actions into place is really important. I think, how can we use people power to say, shut down General Mills and be like, hey, you are not making your food accessible to these communities, or shut down, Family Dollar for preying on Black communities and not giving us the adequate food that we need. Like, I think that when we have like the legal aspect, it's very important, but also changing the social narrative definitely needs like on the ground, boots to the ground, like action. And you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues, like the barriers to food sovereignty, is the lack of access to land. So we really need to be thinking about land justice, who's not only owning land, but who's stewarding it as well. And like in this city, the conversation around Indigenous sovereignty has been so erased, and which is related to the fact that the arch is here and we're the gateway to the West, and like I use that in quotes. But this is like the starting point of colonization across what is now the colonial US. But we need folks to like reconnect with land and have access to land. And there's like a lot of great work happening in North City right now, and a lot of emerging projects around getting Black youth like on that land and like experiencing what it's like to actually be connected to the roots of where our food comes from, and not big food and all the like corporatized food chain aspects that keep us like so disconnected from understanding like what food sovereignty really is. Okay, I'm rambling right now. Take this back.
We accept all rambling, so do not worry. And those were all very good ideas. Thank you. The other topic, does anyone else want to talk about food apartheid, or would you like it, or if not, I'm going to move on to home energy costs.
I was just going to kind of add on to what some people were saying about sort of like that community effort and having like some of those like community centers be sources of food. Because I didn't chime in because I haven't necessarily experienced it in St. Louis. But like when I was living in Chicago, like I had to walk oftentimes to the grocery store, and like when I moved, I was like, oh, the grocery store is a mile away. Like that doesn't seem so bad. And then I was like, I don't have a car. And so like walking to and from the store, like especially once I was carrying those bags, was a lot more, like I think just a lot more of an effort than I had initially thought it would be, and just like the time commitment. So if like communities and neighborhoods are sort of developing a lot of these solutions or these centers where food is being, being sold, or they kind of become these community hubs, and I think it's a lot easier for people in the community to have that access without tacking on all this extra time just getting to and from the store, which I think a lot of people already don't have that time if they're already stressed with other things. So I think I like the idea of those community centers, or those areas where food is being that center of the community, just because I think it helps with like that access issue and just getting to and from some of those locations.
And it is amazing. A mile seems like nothing when you have a car, but if you are in an area where you have to carry a week's worth of groceries for a family of 4 or more, a mile is a very long time, a long distance. And unfortunately, the communities that statistically lack access, like as we talked about earlier in the presentation, the communities that statistically lack access to grocery stores also lack access to cars and frequent public transportation routes. So it's an untenable situation. And before we move on, I just want to keep this sort of door open. Any other comments related to food apartheid?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that just came to me really quickly. Like, there's a clear need for transformation of our public transit situation here in St. Louis is not very equitable at all, where it goes and the routes it takes and everything like that. But I want to point out that there's very clear value in also putting these areas with food in the communities themselves and having them shape how they want it. I just really want to uplift that, because I think most of our solutions are going to come like right from the space we're in right now, like community driven conversations, and there's just so much value in this. I just wanted to uplift that, and yes, thank you. I'm done.
And then is it called emojis in Zoom, or does the word change? I don't know, but I like it. So the next topic talks about energy burden. And has anyone here, or do you know anyone who has lived in a space with the high home energy costs that AK discussed? And if so, could you share a little bit about that story and how that impacted you or them? I see lots of nodding heads. Anyone want to jump in? I can tell you oh, sorry, please go ahead, Matt.
So I guess I'll just keep going. So like at the same time as living in Chicago, I was living in a place with a lot of roommates that was like single pane windows. Like, I mean, there was no insulation. I mean, it was like you were just, I don't know, outside almost. It was very cold. And like during the winter, we almost had like we lived on the second floor. So we thought the downstairs people would turn on their heat and it would rise to us, but they also didn't have the money to spend. So we were just like in this constant, like cold, warm, like just trying to stay warm, and we kept the heat really low. We like tried to use like some space heaters, but we had like this system where some people could have them on and some people couldn't. So we didn't blow out the electricity in the whole building. Like it was just this whole like situation of planning and always wearing like 3 layers. And it was just like, there's some days when we just didn't want to be in our apartment, and we were like, we're just going to go like somewhere else, because we just don't want to be in this space where we're constantly uncomfortable all the time. And I can't imagine what that would be like right now if you were under a stay-at-home order, and that was like you couldn't leave your home to go somewhere public where it was more comfortable. Because, you know, we would just go, we're just going to go to the grocery store because at least it's comfortable there. And it's really uncomfortable here. So yeah, it was like it was a hard winter that year. But yeah, I just can't imagine if we'd have somewhere else to go.
I know when we drafted the report, we spoke to a woman that it cost so much to use her furnace that she heated her home with her oven, because it was cheaper to just turn on the oven and leave that running than it was to use her furnace. It was so old and inefficient. We spoke to another woman who had a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment that cost $700 a month in rent, and she paid $700 a month in utility bills. Her house was so inefficient, whether because of leaks or unsealed windows and doors, cracks, old inefficient appliances. It cost her just as much in rent as it did to heat and cool her apartment. So obviously the impacts of high home energy burden are felt most powerfully on those who have the least amount of money to spend on it, because people with money are in a position to demand that their landlord fix it, or in a position to fix it themselves because they can afford it. but those without the money are those that can't fix it themselves or aren't in a position to demand that their landlord do it themselves. So it's rough, and it serves to keep poor people poorer, which is awful, of course. So what do you all think needs to change to stop this from happening? And please, I really ask, any thought, even if you think it's silly, just say it, because we really,
I think
we want to hear.
I think that we need to really create a St. Louis that has more sustainable energy, and we're not beholden to coal industry. As we're downtown, you can see giant corporation that got their money off of coal, giant corporation that got their money on coal, and they are holding legislators by the testicles, and we're kind of like stuck in this situation where we, you know, we're in debt to these corporations that don't really care about the well-being of the people that are using it. And so like when we're looking for solutions, how can we, you know, one, make sure that these energy companies are beholden to, you know, citizens and when, you know, looking at sustainable energy from Ameren and like having grants for that, but also how can we make it so that there's policy change that people cannot rent a house that is old and drafty, and that, like, you know, what can we make sure that there are standards that don't hurt people that are renters or, you know, immigrant homeowners or whatever. You know, how can we make it so that these houses are up to code and those regulations aren't holding people back from having housing and energy efficient housing?
Picking up on that theme, one of the issues we've experienced through Great Rivers is there are some pretty good ordinances on the books in the city, but they're just not enforced. And when you go to the aldermen of certain wards with issues or complaints, they get kind of swept under the rug and ignored and never really addressed. And so, you know, figuring out how those can be more appropriately enforced across different wards and different zip codes, I think is a challenge that we've been trying to work on, but it's a difficult one. It's certainly an uphill battle.
Well, and I think kind of like Maxie was saying, like, I think a lot of it has to do with the companies that sort of control a lot of the energy that we get it from. But also like the other piece of it is also like just making it so that almost all of these homes have to be like systematically updated in terms of their efficiency. Now I got no idea what it looks like. But if all your energy comes from solar, but the cold wind still comes through, it doesn't do you a ton of good, and you need both pieces. So I think I don't know what that looks like, having someone systematically go through and update all that, but you'd almost have to go like, you know, ward by ward, house by house, and just make sure that like everybody has those like double paned windows and a door that's well sealed and all of these pieces. You know, like you can't rent until you have all those things in place, because those are just like the basics of just being comfortable in your own home.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback off of that. And as you were saying that, what popped in my mind is the idea of like community trusts and funds and co-ops, corporations. I can't speak this evening, it's been a long day. But where community members go in together and purchase portions of their community and like build it up from there. I think that would be a really great way to be beholden and accountable to each other, and making sure that your housing and your utilities are up to code and up to par, instead of a landlord that's not living in that house, not living in that area, don't know what it's like. They're just worried about getting the money necessarily, not making sure that your quality of life is being improved or whatnot. And especially with everyone being living at home, well, not being stuck at home with the stay-at-home order and everything, that's really crucial right now, that people are able to have their voices heard on how they're able to live a life wherever they are that's comfortable, because we don't have many people don't have very many other options. And so how can we improve people's quality of life at home in regards to just like matter of being present in that space?
Yeah, that was, oh, sorry.
Oh, please go ahead. You haven't spoken.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, a thought that popped up for me, that a few people have touched on is just like holding landlords a lot more accountable, because landlords, I feel like, get away with just so much with just ignoring like the quality of the buildings that their tenants stay in, and it's like kind of wild. And then like with this case specifically with energy, and then like that's happening, and like then like all these companies are benefiting from that, to where like then people's energy costs are like going up so much, and it's just, I feel like, one of those cyclical things. So it just feels like, along with like new policies and like sort of standards that buildings have to be kept up with, like it feels like a big part of that would also be like holding landlords accountable and the people who actually own those buildings, because it just seems like, yeah, they just get away with like way too much.
I've never seen you be quiet before.
It's for housing, energy costs, and food appetites. I'm not. Hi, sorry, I'm explaining to someone about what we're meeting about. So I think, one thing that I wanted to add upon is like the fact of housing and stability, how some people might be indifferent about like the inefficiency of the building that they're about to rent. I know definitely growing up, there were times when I would rent somewhere that had holes in the walls because that was the only place that would rent to me for under the table. And so like, as we look at policy change, we also have to understand those that live outside of policy in the underground, and how we can make not just legislation, but like social reshift of what is acceptable for us to live in. And that accessibility is really different between a case by case scenario.
Now, a lot of the issues that we're talking about are with landlords, which of course, I mean, that is the problem. If someone owns their own home, they're frankly responsible for choosing, fixing things or not. That's not really a government problem to come in, at least in my mind, to come in and replace someone's furnace. But in landlord housing, you have this issue where there's a problem with incentives. A landlord has an incentive to earn as much money as he or she can, and a tenant has an incentive to pay as little money as he or she can. Any money that the tenant puts in to improve the apartment benefits the landlord, not the tenant. I mean, it benefits the tenant in the short term, but any serious improvements benefit the landlord, because a tenant can't take a furnace with him or her. Can't take a patched wall with him or her. So you only have 60 seconds. Do you have any sort of thoughts on changes you would like to see specifically in the landlord-tenant relationship? Because I do think that is so important. Or any experiences that you want to share there where you wanted something changed and you were unable to, or succeeded?
What really helped me in a crappy college housing situation is my college kind of had like an ADR, like an alternative dispute resolution, where we could go for free to kind of sit down with landlords to kind of negotiate like what was going on in our housing situation. And, being a college kid, just not really understanding my rights as a tenant, that was so helpful. And I think it really scared our landlord to not be predators, because there's kind of like a third watchdog. So I really think like tenants and landlord clinics and just like free access to that kind of representation, or just advocacy of knowing those rights, would be helpful in terms of trying to get the resources to get better windows and better, just better utility situations going on for you.
And we can keep on talking for the next 60 seconds. It'll drag us over whether we want to or not in 60 seconds. Anyone else? I really like these ideas, and I kind of want to hear more if there are more.
Everyone, welcome back. It's good to see all of you again. I forgot how many people there were. Well, we definitely want to take this time to hear what everyone was talking about, because I'm sure everyone was having some great conversations. So people who've been on this call before know this. I, will sit in silence, but I also might call on someone to get, things started if no one's talking. So it's probably in everyone's best interest that someone starts. But I want to open up the conversation to first kind of talk about what were some of the things that your group was discussing about the limited access to healthy foods, experiences with that, and what we think needs to change to make a real difference in our communities. So I'm finished talking, and we'd love to hear what conversations people were having about that.
I'll start us off. So our group spoke with regard to the food situation, had a lot of really good and interesting ideas, focusing on urban farming, reusing of the many vacant lots within the city for that purpose. Also the use of co-ops. We have a good number of vacant buildings in this city, creating neighborhood co-ops for sort of neighborhood owned grocery store foods where the money is pooled to make that happen and to bring healthier foods into the neighborhood. Now, I did not take notes because this is being recorded, so if anyone else has better notes as to what we discussed, please jump in.
Yeah, I took a few notes. One thing I heard was really a lot of community education would be important around this, as well as many people know there's an issue with not, like specifically those living in their communities, they know there's an issue. How can we empower them and educate them to find solutions for themselves and work together in their own communities? And also, one thing I heard is shaping a narrative around this in their communities and using it to mobilize more folks to get them to, whether that be farming, creating a co-op, like that was something mentioned. That was really something that I heard really clearly.
Something that I brought up in our group kind of builds on what Tara said, is that the city's environment for having small businesses is kind of chaotic and a mess. And they throw a lot of hurdles in the way for small businesses. So I'm assuming co-ops would kind of fall into that. So I think if we're going to look at creative ways to have some sort of food empowerment and ways to purchase food, the city also needs to correct its inefficiencies in allowing small businesses to start up.
Awesome. Anybody else want to talk about this? But I'm just gonna go ahead and add in the high home costs as well, and we can kind of discuss it as a whole. But just, as you or somebody lived in these spaces with these high home costs, we talked about a lot in our group, people shouldn't be forced to make this decision to turn the heat on in the winter, or, to turn the AC on in the summer to get some amount of relief from the incredibly hot and humid weather we have here in St. Louis in the summer. So this shouldn't be happening. But it's gonna keep happening until something changes. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do to get people access to healthier food? And what do we need to do to help people deal, with this utility burden, energy burden, and these high health costs?
A couple of ideas that came up in our session. Well, we talked about how, in terms of food apartheid, how linked it is with public transportation gaps, and so how important it is to work on those issues as well, and have it widely accessible across the city and county. And then in terms of home energy costs, we kind of brainstormed about how to create incentives for landlords to invest in higher quality energy saving appliances, for instance, or weatherization, or ways that they could improve the space, and which is better for the environment, but also would save on energy bills for the tenants. And so whether that's a subsidy program from a city or a grant that's written by a nonprofit where they could reimburse. I mean, these are, we're kind of just spitballing and throwing ideas out there, but getting the landlords on board is pretty key.
Anyone else want to share? Don't want to call people out, but if group leaders, if you felt like there was someone in your group who hasn't spoken, who offered some really great, pieces to the conversation, you want to lift that up in this space.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I really enjoyed what Madeline spoke about in regards to the tenants' rights education that they experienced in college, I believe you said. If you could share with folks, I think that would be really great.
Yeah, of course. So my college in Oregon kind of had a situation where they would set up just like a resource for people to deal with their landlords. Us being like college kids, not really knowing our rights as tenants, it was just kind of helpful to have someone else in the room kind of advocating for us, or just having informational sheets of like what our rights were as a tenant. And so just setting up something like that in St. Louis, I think would be helpful, just so people feel like there's a check on some landlords in the city who are predators, and go after the lowest standard of living situations.
I just want to throw in there, while we're talking about landlord or tenant rights, that Dutchtown South Community Corporation does a lot of work with tenant rights. So if you or somebody you know are running into an issue with a landlord, please reach out to us at Dutchtown South, and we can get you pointed in the right direction. And then a shout out to Arch City Defenders. That direction will most likely be to call Arch City Defenders. So thank you, Arch City, for your great tenant right work.
Great. Well, sorry, my cat is like very invested in this environmental racism meeting. So I think something that we definitely hit on in my group, and I think I've heard it echoing in the others, is just that, we need to think about all of the arenas in which we need to be combating these issues. So a lot of it is kind of dual focused. You have the direct need. So you need to be, we need to be in communities, making sure that people like immediately have access to healthy food, whether that means food banks or food pantries, or we talked about some community gardens that communities have had little farmers markets and let people use like SNAP or WIC and double up on those bucks when they're using that for produce. So there's kind of that direct service in the same way with the programs that help people pay, their energy bills or their gas bills, et cetera. But also we have to look, at the policy level and think, who are the targets? Who do we need to be targeting to get laws in place that make it easier for small businesses to open in communities and that incentivize, affordable grocery options to be put in these areas where people don't have them. And, who do we target and who do we pressure? What legislation do we need or incentives do we need to get people to, like modernize their homes with these energy efficient technologies that can then help lower these costs for folks? So we kind of have to look at it in both of these ways. And that's something that can feel really tough because it can feel hard to, just do one. But, luckily we have lots of people who can do really great research and policy work, and also lots of folks who can be, really great and on the ground. So I think it's just going to be a big work in progress, but it's really great to hear, everything that everyone has to say and stuff that's worked and stuff that we've seen going on in places, and maybe that we could try and do more. So with that being said, if unless anyone has any last thing to say, I'm going to close us out.
Yeah, I guess just one final thing. Like you mentioned, I think many of these issues that do come up with environmental racism do definitely have like a lot of, I touched on this in our group as well, but they do have a lot of different like multifaceted approaches that really can be taken through the individual or through companies, getting like company incentives to kind of like align, and just what the government can do directly, for example, with the heat islands, increasing vegetation, increasing just like roofing, like the roofs, how they're able to kind of circulate the heat in a way, like decrease the heat that's circulating, and kind of just there's different measures that can be taken. I feel like everything really needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really, really true. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming and for having these conversations. So like I said, this is the third event that we've been having. So this Environmental Racism Solution Series is going to be 4 Solution Series events and then culminating in a summit. So the next meeting is going to be next Wednesday, which is November 11th, at the same time, 6:30 to 8. And it's called Old and Moldy Toxins. So we're going to take a look into how mold and lead poisoning disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so that's going to be, again, a really important conversation and something that I think is really relevant to a lot of folks in St. Louis. So we definitely want to encourage you to help us spread the word about these events. There's a lot of accessibility issues when it comes to having virtual events, and a lot of times people in the communities and people who are most impacted by these things are not always the people that end up in these conversations, even though those are the voices, that we really want to hear and lift up, because those closest to the problems are often closest to the solutions. So we definitely encourage you to spread the word about these events. And then our summit, which is going to be the culmination, where we're going to kind of bring together these community solutions that we've been discussing, as well as talking more about the COVID-19 tie. So that is going to be on Saturday, November 14th. It's going to be from 1 to 5 p.m. So it's going to be a longer event. It's going to have some kind of like go at your own pace portions, as well as some different speakers. And that's going to be at the Neighborhood Innovation Center. So it's actually going to be a hybrid event. So there will be an in-person place where we can be, and then it could also be, you can also join virtually, whatever you feel comfortable with. The Neighborhood Innovation Center has an outdoor lot, so it's going to be an outdoor thing in that space. And masks will be required, will be social distancing, etc. But so there'll be 2 ways that you can kind of interact with that: in person, if you feel more comfortable with that, or if you want to stay in the virtual space. And we'll have more details about what that will look like coming out throughout the week and at our next meeting. But we definitely hope to see you next week, so you can talk more about lead and mold with us. We would really appreciate that. And if you haven't filled out the sign-in sheet that was in the chat earlier, make sure that you do that. And we thank you for being here tonight and hope to see you next week.